In the middle of the Alaskan bush, 20 miles west of the town of Healy, there is a rusting hulk of metal that became the most famous shrine in modern exploration history. It was a 1946 International Harvester K5, a Fairbanks City bus painted green and white with the number 142 stamped on the side. It was dragged out there in the 1960s by a construction company to house workers building a mining road. When the road was finished, the workers left. But they left the bus behind. It sat there for decades, its paint peeling, its windows cracking, slowly being swallowed by the taiga. It was a piece of trash, a relic of industry left to rot, until 1992. In September of that year, 3 moose hunters stumbled across the bus. They smelled something rotting. They looked inside. Lying in a blue sleeping bag was the emaciated corpse of a young man. He weighed 67 pounds. Beside him was a camera with 5 rolls of film, a rifle, a few books, and a diary. His name was Christopher McCandless, but to the world he would become known as Alexander Supertramp. For 30 years this boy has haunted us, but he haunts us in different ways. To half the world, Chris McCandless is a prophet, a saint of the anti-modern movement. He is the boy who walked away from capitalism, from careers, from the crushing expectations of suburbia to find truth in the wild. He is a romantic hero who died for his ideals. To the other half, mostly Alaskans, he is a fool, a suicidal narcissist who walked into the most dangerous country in America without a map, without a compass, and without an axe. They see his death not as a tragedy, but as the inevitable mathematical result of arrogance. Who is right? Was he a visionary? Or was he just another unprepared tourist who underestimated the wild? To answer that, we have to look past the movie. We have to look past the famous book. We have to look at the timeline, because the timeline tells a story that is darker, messier, and far more human than the myth. This is the true story of the long walk into the wild. To understand the end, you have to understand the beginning. And the beginning was not in Alaska. It was in Annandale, Virginia. Christopher Johnson McCandless was born into the heart of the American dream. His father, Walt McCandless, was a brilliant man, an aerospace engineer who worked for NASA. He designed radar systems. He was the kind of man who solved problems with logic and force. He was intense, controlling, and accustomed to being obeyed. His mother, Billy, was his father's business partner. Together, they built a successful consulting firm. They worked hard. They made money. They bought a nice house in the suburbs. They had the Cadillac. They had the boat. They had the vacations. Chris was the golden child. He was good at everything he touched. He was the captain of the cross-country team at Woodson High School. He wasn't just fast, he was intense. He would lead the team on suicide runs into the woods, pushing them until they got lost, just to see if they could find their way back. He viewed running not as a sport, but as a spiritual exercise in suffering. He was a straight A student. He played the piano and the French horn. He was accepted into Emory University in Atlanta, a prestigious school. But underneath the surface of this perfect suburban life, there was a rot. The McCandless house was a war zone. Walt and Billy fought constantly. These weren't just arguments, they were battles. There was screaming. There was violence. The children, Chris and his younger sister, Kareen, were the collateral damage. But there was a deeper secret, a secret that would shatter Chris's reality. During a trip to California one summer, Chris discovered that his father had lived a double life. When Walt moved in with Billy and had Chris, he was still married to his first wife, Marcia. He had another family, another set of children. Chris was, technically, an illegitimate child. For a young man who saw the world in black and white, truth versus lies, good versus evil, this was unforgivable. He saw his father not just as flawed, but as a hypocrite. He saw his comfortable suburban life not as a blessing, but as a lie paid for with deception. He didn't scream. He didn't rebel openly. He did something more dangerous. He internalized it. He began to judge. He began to look at his parents' wealth, the new cars, the nice clothes, as things. He viewed materialism as a prison. He went to Emory University, but he treated it like a sentence. He got nearly perfect grades. He wrote for the student newspaper, but he was pulling away. He lived in a Spartan apartment. He had no phone. He started giving away his money. In May of 1990, he graduated. His parents came to the ceremony. They were proud. They offered to buy him a new car as a graduation gift. He already had a car, a beat-up yellow 1982 Datsun B210. He loved that car. When they offered to replace it, Chris was insulted. "I don't need a new car," he told them. "I don't need things." The day after graduation, he mailed his final college transcript to his parents. It was the last thing they would ever receive from him. He had $24,000 in his savings account. It was money left over from a college fund, intended for law school. Chris walked into a bank. He withdrew the entire amount. He didn't spend it. He didn't buy gear. He wrote a check to Oxfam, a charity dedicated to fighting hunger. He gave it all away. Then, he got in his Datsun. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He just drove. He was 22 years old, and he was free. July 1990, the American West. Chris drove to Lake Mead in Nevada. He drove off-road, down a dry wash, ignoring the signs that prohibited vehicles. He found a secluded spot near the lake. He set up camp. This was his first mistake, and his first liberation. A few days later, the sky opened up. A flash flood roared down the wash. It was sudden and violent. The water swamped his beloved Datsun. The engine was flooded. The battery was dead. The car was buried in mud up to the wheel wells. Most people would panic. Most people would walk to the nearest ranger station, call a tow truck, and salvage the vehicle. Chris McCandless saw it as a sign. He didn't try to save the car. He stripped it. He took his guitar, a bag of rice, his rifle, and a few clothes. He piled the rest of his possessions inside the car and left it. Then, he did something ritualistic. He took the cash he had in his wallet, about $120. He gathered some twigs and made a small fire. He threw the money into the flames. He watched the faces of the presidents curl and turn to ash. It was a baptism by fire. In that moment, Chris McCandless ceased to exist. He wrote in his journal, "I have had a happy life and thank the Lord. Goodbye, and may God bless all." He wasn't saying goodbye to life. He was saying goodbye to his identity. He adopted a new name. He carved it into a piece of wood. Alexander Supertramp. He began to walk. He walked west. He stuck out his thumb. For the next 2 years, Alex Supertramp was a ghost. He moved through the underbelly of America. He was a rubber tramp, a hitchhiker. He went to California. He went to the redwood forests. He worked on a farm in Northern California for a man named Crazy Ernie, but left when he realized Ernie wasn't going to pay him. He was learning, but he was learning the hard way. He was skinny. He was often hungry, but he was ecstatic. He was living the life of Jack London, of Thoreau. He felt he was seeing the real world, stripped of the artificial safety of the suburbs. He didn't carry a map. He didn't carry a watch. He wanted to be lost. October 1990, Topak, Arizona. Alex had a new idea. He wanted to float. He walked into a town and bought a cheap, second-hand aluminum canoe. His plan? To paddle down the Colorado River to the Gulf of California, to the ocean. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't get a permit. He just put the boat in the water and started paddling south. This journey is often overlooked in the McCandless mythology, but it shows his mindset perfectly. He was relentless, and he was lucky. He paddled through the Topak Gorge. He paddled past the Lake Havasu crowds. He reached the Mexican border. The river enters a complex system of dams and canals at the border. Most paddlers stop there. Alex kept going. He snuck past the border guards. He paddled into the Morelos Dam system. He got lost in the labyrinth of irrigation canals that drain the Colorado River before it reaches the sea. The river didn't flow to the ocean anymore. It flowed into muddy dead ends in the desert. He was stuck. He was dragging his canoe through mud and sand. He was lost in a foreign country, speaking broken Spanish, with no map. He met a group of Mexican duck hunters. They could have robbed him. They could have killed him. Instead, they took pity on this skinny gringo. They towed his canoe to the ocean. He reached the Gulf of California. He paddled out into the open sea. It was nearly a disaster. A storm hit. The winds whipped the sea into large swells. He was in a flat water canoe, miles from shore. He was terrified. He broke an oar. He almost capsized. He managed to wash up on a beach. He stayed there for weeks, living in a cave, eating rice and fish he caught. He called this time the magic. But the isolation started to wear on him, and the sea had scared him. He realized that the ocean was too big, too indifferent. He abandoned the canoe. He left it on a dune. He tried to walk back to the U.S. He was caught by immigration police at the border. He had no ID. He had thrown it away. He spent a night in jail. He managed to talk his way out of it, explaining he was just an American boy who got lost. They let him go. He walked back into the United States. He went to Los Angeles to get an ID and a job, but the city disgusted him. The noise, the concrete, the fakeness. He felt like a caged animal. He fled back to the desert, the American West. This is the period where the saint mythology comes from, because everywhere Alex went, people fell in love with him. He was charismatic. He was polite. He was incredibly well-read. He wasn't a bum. He was a seeker. Adults, in particular, were drawn to him. They saw in him the son they wished they had, or the freedom they wished they had taken. He met Jan Burris and her boyfriend Bob. They were rubber tramps, drifting around the West selling knickknacks at flea markets. They picked Alex up on the side of the road. Jan took one look at him and her heart broke. He reminded her of her own estranged son. She tried to feed him. She tried to give him clothes. Alex resisted. He was proud. He worked for them at the flea markets, organizing books. He loved Jack London. He pushed Call of the Wild on everyone he met. Jan noticed something about Alex. He was intense. He was social. He would talk to anyone. But he had a wall up. He wouldn't talk about his family. Whenever Jan asked about his parents, he would shut down. "They're assholes," was all he would say. He spent weeks with them in the Slabs, Slab City, an old Navy base in the California desert that had been taken over by drifters and outcasts. It was a lawless, dusty utopia. Alex loved it. He played the organ for the locals. He jogged through the desert every morning, but he couldn't stay. He told Jan he had a great destiny. He called it the Great Alaskan Odyssey. Jan was scared for him. She saw how skinny he was. She saw how unprepared he was. Before he left, she forced him to take some long underwear and warm knives. He tried to give her his money. She refused. He walked away. Jan Burrs never saw him again. January 1992. Salton City, California. Alex was hitchhiking near the Salton Sea. An 80-year-old man named Ron Franz stopped to pick him up. Ron was a retired soldier, a devout Christian. He had lost his wife and his only son in a car accident decades earlier. He had been alone for a long time. When Ron met Alex, something sparked. Ron saw a boy who needed guidance. Alex saw a man who needed shaking up. They became an unlikely pair, the octogenarian and the 23-year-old tramp. Ron tried to convince Alex to go back to school, to get a job, to make something of himself. Alex tried to convince Ron to sell his possessions, move out of his apartment, and live on the road. You're wrong if you think joy emanates only or principally from human relationships, Alex told him. God has placed it all around us. It is in everything and anything we might experience. We just have to have the courage to turn against our habitual lifestyle and engage in unconventional living. Ron taught Alex leatherworking. Alex made a belt, a famous belt. It was a visual diary of his journey. He carved symbols into the leather: a fish for the ocean, N.O. for New Orleans, a thumb for hitchhiking, and his new initials, A.S. Alexander, Supertramp. As the weeks passed, Ron Franz grew deeply attached to Alex. He loved him. One day, while they were driving, Ron turned to Alex. He asked him a question that hangs over this story like a tragedy. "Alex," Ron said, "I don't have any family left. I was wondering if I could adopt you. I want you to be my grandson." Alex felt the trap closing, the trap of intimacy, the trap of family. He dodged the question. "We can talk about it when I get back from Alaska," he said. He left. He sent Ron a letter from the road, a long, beautiful letter urging the old man to change his life. Don't settle down and sit in one place. Move around, be nomadic, make each day a new horizon. Amazingly, Ron Franz listened. An 81-year-old man, he put his furniture in storage, bought a camper, and moved out into the desert. He waited for Alex to return. He waited for a boy who was already walking toward his grave. March 1992, South Dakota. Alex returned to Carthage, South Dakota, to work for a man named Wayne Westerberg. Wayne was a grain elevator operator, a roughneck, a criminal technically. He had done time for building black boxes to descramble satellite TV signals. But he was a good man. He was the closest thing Alex had to a father figure he actually respected. Alex worked at the grain elevator. It was dirty, hard, physical labor. Alex thrived on it. He wasn't naturally mechanical. The other workers made fun of him because he couldn't use a microwave properly. But he worked harder than anyone. He shoveled grain until his hands bled. He told Wayne about Alaska. He said he was going to go into the bush and live off the land for a few months. He wanted to prove he could survive without civilization. Wayne noticed that Alex had no gear. He didn't have shit, Wayne said later. Wayne offered to buy him a plane ticket to Fairbanks. Alex refused. "I'm going to hitchhike, that's the point." April 15th, 1992. It was time to go. Alex had saved up about $1,000. He hugged Wayne goodbye. He sent postcards to Jan Burse and Ron Franz. The postcard to Wayne was haunting. It read, "This is the last you shall hear from me, Wayne. Arrived here 2 days ago. It was very difficult to catch rides in the Yukon Territory. But I finally got here. Please return all mail I received to the sender. It might be a very long time before I return south. If this adventure proves fatal and you don't ever hear from me again, I want you to know you're a great man. I now walk into the wild." If this adventure proves fatal, he knew. Somewhere, deep down, he knew the stakes. He stuck out his thumb. A truck driver picked him up. He was heading north, to the end of the road. April 25th, 1992. Fairbanks, Alaska. Alaska is not like the lower 48. In the lower 48, if you walk into the woods and get lost, you can usually walk in a straight line for 2 days and hit a road. In Alaska, you can walk in a straight line for 2 months and never see a human soul. Chris McCandless arrived in Fairbanks with a rifle, a backpack, and a dream. The rifle was a Remington Nylon 66. It was a semi-automatic .22 caliber, a plastic stock, lightweight. It is a gun designed for shooting squirrels and rabbits. It is not a gun designed for killing bears or moose. It was woefully underpowered for what he was about to attempt. He went to the university library. He studied books on edible plants. He bought a 10-pound bag of rice. On April 28th, he stuck out his thumb on the George Parks Highway. A man named Jim Gallion pulled over. Jim was an electrician, an Alaskan native. He saw a kid standing in the snow with a light jacket and a cheap pair of rubber boots. He stopped. "Where you headed?" Jim asked. "I want to go out on the Stampede Trail," Alex said. "I'm going to walk into the bush and live off the land for a few months." Jim looked at the kid's gear. He saw the boots. Gallion knew they were gumbays, cheap rubber boots that wouldn't keep your feet warm in winter and had no ankle support. He saw the tiny backpack. He saw the .22 rifle. Jim was worried. He had seen guys like this before. Tourists who came to Alaska looking for Jack London fantasies and ended up dead. "The hunting is bad out there right now," Jim warned him. "There's still 2 feet of snow on the ground. The bears are waking up, and that gun won't stop a grizzly." Alex smiled. He was polite but dismissive. "I'll be fine," he said. "I've been living on the streets. I know how to take care of myself." Jim tried to scare him. He told him stories about people freezing to death. He offered to drive him to Anchorage to buy him decent gear. Alex refused. "I don't want any help. I want to do this on my own." They drove for 3 hours. When they reached the head of the Stampede Trail, a rough mining track that cut into the wilderness, Jim tried one last time. "Take my boots," Jim said. "They're insulated." "No thanks," Alex said. "At least take this," Jim said. He handed Alex a sandwich and a bag of corn chips. Alex took the food. He handed Jim his watch, his comb, and his last 85 cents. "I don't need these anymore," he said. He stepped out of the truck. He shouldered his pack. He smiled a huge, radiant smile. He looked like the happiest man on earth. Jim Gallion took a picture of him. It's the last photo of Chris McCandless alive where he isn't alone. Jim watched him walk down the snow-covered trail. He thought about calling the state troopers. He didn't. He figured the kid would get hungry in a few days and walk back out to the highway. Jim was wrong. Chris walked into the wild. The Stampede Trail isn't really a trail. It's a route bulldozed in the 1930s. It crosses rivers and bogs. On the second day, April 29th, Chris came to the Teclanica River. This is the most critical geographic detail in the story. In April, the Teclanica is frozen. It's a low, icy ribbon of water. Chris walked across the ice without getting his feet wet. He didn't think twice about it. He kept walking. 20 miles from the highway, he saw a spot of green and white in the distance. It was the bus, Bus 142. It was parked on a small rise near the Sushana River. It had a wood stove installed inside. It had broken windows, but it was a shelter. It was perfect. Chris wrote in his journal, "Magic Bus Day." He moved in. He hung his few clothes. He made a bed on the dirty mattress at the back. He declared this his base camp. He was finally alone. He was living his dream. He wrote, 2 years he walks the earth. No phone, no pool, no pets, no cigarettes, ultimate freedom, an extremist, an aesthetic voyager whose home is the road. May and June were hard but successful. Chris was hunting. He shot squirrels, porcupines, and spruce grouse. He called them the feasts. He gathered wild potatoes and berries. He read Tolstoy and Thoreau. He scribbled notes in the margins of the books, having arguments with the authors about the nature of truth. But he was also hungry. The caloric math wasn't working. He was burning more energy hunting than he was getting from the meat. He was slowly losing weight. Then, on June 9th, he got lucky. He saw a moose, a 600-pound animal. With a .22 rifle, you have to be precise. You have to hit the brain or the heart. If you miss, the moose runs away or charges you. Chris aimed. He fired. The moose fell. It was a triumph. This was enough meat to last him for months. He wrote in his journal, "Moose," in giant letters. He felt like a true hunter-gatherer, but the triumph turned into a tragedy. Chris knew how to kill, but he didn't know how to preserve. He didn't know how to smoke meat. He tried to smoke it, but he did it wrong. Within 3 days, the meat was swarming with maggots. It turned green. It smelled of death. He had to leave the carcass for the wolves. It broke him psychologically. He wrote, "I wish I had never shot the moose, one of the greatest tragedies of my life." He felt he had disrespected the animal. He had wasted life. After the moose incident, something changed in Chris. The romance began to fade. The reality of the isolation set in. He had proven his point. He had survived 2 months in the wild. He had lived off the land. He had found his great truth. In July, he decided to leave. He packed his bag. He left the bus. He began the 20-mile hike back to the highway. He was skinny, but he was strong. He was going to go back to Ron Franz. He was going to write a book about his journey. He walked for 2 days. He reached the banks of the Teclanica River, and he stopped dead. The river he had stepped across in April was gone. In its place was a raging, violent torrent of gray glacial water. It was July. The glaciers had melted. The river was swollen with runoff. It was 100 feet wide and deep. The current was powerful enough to drown a bear. Chris wasn't a strong swimmer. He looked at the water. He threw a stick in. It was sucked under instantly. He walked up and down the bank looking for a place to cross. There was none. If he had a map, a simple topographical map that cost $5 at the gas station, he would have seen that half a mile downstream, there was a gauging station with a cable car that spanned the river. He could have pulled himself across in a metal basket, but he had no map. In his arrogance, he had refused to carry one. He was trapped. He stood on the bank of the Teclanica. The highway and safety was only a few miles away on the other side. But it might as well have been on the moon. He turned around. He walked back to the bus. August 1992. The bus was no longer a home. It was a cage. The hunting dried up. The animals moved to higher ground. The berries were disappearing. Chris was starving. He was eating squirrels, which have almost no fat. He was suffering from rabbit starvation, protein poisoning. When you eat only lean meat without fat, your body consumes its own muscle tissue. He was becoming weak, too weak to hunt. Then, the final mistake. There is a theory, proposed by John Krakauer, that Chris didn't just starve. He poisoned himself. He had been eating the roots of the wild potato plant. They are edible. But in August, the potato plant looks very similar to a toxic mold or a different species of legume that contains a neurotoxin. Chris ate the seeds. Within days, he was incapacitated. The toxin stops the body from metabolizing energy. It paralyzes the digestion. You can eat, but you get no energy. You starve with a full stomach. His journal entries became short. Desperate. Day 100. Made it. But in weakest condition of life. Death looms as serious threat. He was too weak to walk. He lay in the sleeping bag at the back of the bus. He wrote a note. He tore a page out of a book of Gogol. He wrote in block letters, "SOS, I need your help. I am injured, near death, and too weak to hike out. I am all alone. This is no joke. In the name of God, please remain to save me. I am out collecting berries close by. and shall return this evening. Thank you, Chris McCandless. August? He signed it with his real name, not Alexander Supertramp. In the end, he wanted to be found as himself. He taped the note to the window of the bus. He tied a red SOS flag to a stick on the bus door. Then he crawled into the sleeping bag. He spent his final days listening to the wind. He took one last photo of himself. In the photo, he is leaning against the bus. He is skeletal. His face is a skull, but he is smiling. One hand is raised in a wave. It is a wave of goodbye. He looks peaceful. He wrote one final message in his journal. I have had a happy life, and thank the Lord. Goodbye, and may God bless all. Sometime around August 18, 1992, Christopher McCandless closed his eyes. 19 days later, the hunters found him. When the news broke, it ignited a firestorm. Walt and Billy McCandless were devastated. They had spent 2 years waiting for the phone to ring. They had hired private investigators. They had searched. To find out their son had starved to death in a bus was a grief that is impossible to describe. Kareen, his sister, flew to Alaska to bring his ashes home. She carried them in her backpack on the plane. She ate every scrap of food on her tray, unable to waste a crumb, knowing her brother had starved. But the public reaction was divided. The Alaskans were furious. They saw Chris as an insult to the wilderness. They pointed out his mistakes. He had no map. He had no compass. He had no axe. He had a squirrel gun. He didn't know the river cycles. One Alaskan park ranger wrote, McCandless was simply one more suicide case, an arrogant kid who thought he could rewrite the laws of nature. But to others, he became a martyr. John Krakauer wrote Into the Wild, turning Chris's story into a modern myth. Young people began to make pilgrimages to the bus. They saw Chris as someone who refused to sell out, someone who lived authentically, even if it killed him. Some of those pilgrims died. In 2010, a Swiss woman drowned trying to cross the Teklenika River to see the bus. In 2019, a newlywed woman from Belarus drowned in the same river. The bus became a dangerous symbol. It was luring unprepared kids into the wild, just like it lured Chris. In 2020, the Alaska National Guard flew a Chinook helicopter to the site. They rigged chains to the roof of Bus 142. They lifted it into the air. They flew it away. It sits in a museum in Fairbanks now, safe, sterilized, behind glass. So, was he a hero or a fool? Perhaps he was both. Chris McCandless was a young man in pain. He was running from a father he couldn't forgive and a society he didn't understand. He sought healing in the only place that makes no demands, the wild. He found his truth. He found that happiness is only real when shared. He wrote that in the margins of Dr. Zhivago right before he died. Happiness only real when shared. He realized too late that the isolation he craved was actually a prison. He wanted to come back. He wanted to hug his sister. He wanted to forgive his parents. The tragedy of Chris McCandless is not that he died. We all die. The tragedy is that he died just as he was ready to start living. He walked into the wild a boy. He died a man. And he left us with a question that we are still trying to answer. How much of yourself are you willing to kill to feel alive? September 6, 1992. 3 weeks had passed since Chris McCandless closed his eyes. The bus sat silent on the Stampede Trail. The leaves of the aspen trees were turning yellow. Winter was coming back to the Shoshana River. Ken Thompson, Gordon Sammel, and Ferdy Swanson were 3 moose hunters from Healy. They were driving their all-terrain vehicles down the trail, struggling through the mud and the swollen rivers. They weren't looking for a bus. They were looking for meat. When they reached the clearing, they saw the bus. This wasn't unusual. Locals knew about the bus. But as they got closer, they noticed something wrong. There was a smell. It was distinct, sweet, cloying, and unmistakable to anyone who hunts. It was the smell of death. They approached the vehicle. They saw the SOS note taped to the window. SOS, I need your help. They saw the red flag tied to the antenna. Gordon Sammel was the one who looked inside. He peered through a broken window. He saw a sleeping bag on the mattress at the back of the bus. It looked like it was filled with something. He shouted, no answer. Gordon walked around to the back. There was no lock on the emergency door, but it was jammed. He pulled harder. The door creaked open. The smell washed over him. He saw the blue sleeping bag. He saw a head protruding from it. The face was gone, decomposed. But the hair was there, and the teeth. There's a body, Gordon said. There's a dead guy in here. They didn't go in. They were shaken. They stood outside the bus, surrounded by the vast, indifferent silence of the Alaska Range. They realized they had stumbled onto a tragedy. A few minutes later, another couple appeared. Butch Killian and his wife, also hunters. Butch had a radio. He called the Alaska State Troopers. We have a 10-something out here at the old bus, Butch said. It looks like a fatality. The next morning, a police helicopter descended. The rotors whipped the yellow leaves into a frenzy. The troopers entered the bus. They found the rifle. They found the books. They found the camera. And they found the diary. It wasn't a long diary, just brief, cryptic notes scratched onto the pages of a field guide to edible plants. Day 100, made it. Day 107, beautiful blueberries. Day 113, critical. They lifted the body. It weighed 67 pounds. It was light as a feather. They placed Chris McCandless in a body bag and flew him out of the wild. He had walked in. He flew out. The body was at the coroner's office in Fairbanks, but it had no name. Chris had destroyed his ID. He had burned his social security card. To the authorities, he was a John Doe, a starved hiker. The autopsy confirmed he died of starvation. There was no subcutaneous fat. His muscles had wasted away. But they didn't know who he was. The clues were in the bus. They developed the film found in the camera. The photos emerged from the dark room one by one. A skinny young man smiling with a porcupine. The same young man butchering a moose. And the final photo. The young man skeletal, waving goodbye, holding a note that said, "I have had a happy life." But there was no name. Then they looked at the clothes. He was wearing a blue sweatshirt. On the chest was a logo, Santa Barbara Towing. The troopers called the towing company in California. No one there knew a Alex. But one of the workers remembered a kid who had hitched a ride with them months ago. A kid from South Dakota. They traced the lead to Carthage, South Dakota, to Wayne Westerberg. When the police called Wayne, he knew instantly. "It's Alex," Wayne said. "Alex Supertramp." "Do you know his real name?" the police asked. "No," Wayne said. "But he gave me his social security number for tax forms." Wayne dug through his files. He found the W-4 form. There it was. Christopher J. McCandless, Annandale, Virginia. The call to Walt and Billy McCandless was the call every parent dreads. The call that ends the world. They confirmed it using dental records. The boy in the bus was the golden child of Annandale. For years the story ended there. A tragedy of arrogance. A boy starves to death because he didn't bring enough food. But John Krakauer, the author of Into the Wild, couldn't let it go. Something didn't add up. Chris McCandless wasn't stupid. He had successfully hunted a moose. He was eating berries. Starvation takes a long time. Why did he deteriorate so fast in August? Krakauer became obsessed with the seeds. In the diary, Chris blamed the potato seeds. H. alpinum, wild potato, is a common plant in Alaska. The roots are safe. The Dena'ina people have eaten them for centuries. But Chris had started eating the seeds in late summer. Krakauer theorized that Chris had confused the wild potato with the wild sweet pea, H. McKenzie, which looks similar but is toxic. Botanists laughed at Krakauer. They analyzed the seeds found in the bus. They were definitely wild potato, H. alpinum. They were supposed to be safe. The boy just starved, the scientists said. Don't make excuses for him. But Krakauer kept digging. For 20 years, he sent samples to labs. In 2013, he finally found the answer, and it vindicated Chris McCandless. The seeds contained a neurotoxin called L-cannabinine, and later identified as ODAP. It's an amino acid that mimics a neurotransmitter. It doesn't kill you directly. It causes a condition called latherism. It paralyzes the legs. Imagine the horror. Chris is hungry, but he is mobile. He eats the seeds to survive. The toxin hits his system. Suddenly, his legs feel heavy. Then, they stop working. He is paralyzed from the waist down. He can't hike out. He can't hunt. He can barely crawl to the stream to get water. He didn't starve because he ran out of food. He starved because he was paralyzed by a plant that no chemistry book in 1992 listed as toxic. He wasn't arrogant. He was unlucky. He was the victim of a scientific anomaly that wouldn't be discovered for another 2 decades. 10 months after Chris died, Walt and Billy McCandless flew to Alaska. They took a helicopter to the bus. They wanted to see where their son had spent his final days. Billy McCandless walked into the bus. She saw the mattress where her son had died. She saw his boots. She saw his handwriting on the walls. She smelled the smell of him, not the death, but the smell of his clothes, the jeans he had worn. She wept. She left a suitcase there. Inside was a first aid kit, some food, and a Bible. She left a note for other travelers. Explore, but be careful. Don't die here. Walt, the tough NASA engineer, was broken. He stood by the river that had trapped his son. He looked at the bus. He tried to understand. I don't know why he had to take it this far, Walt said. I just don't know. They installed a plaque on the inside of the door. Christopher Johnson McCandless, 1968 to 1992. They left the bus as a shrine, but the shrine became a problem. After the book came out, and then the Sean Penn movie in 2007, the cult of McCandless exploded. Thousands of young people disillusioned with modern life traveled to Healy. They wanted to walk the Stampede Trail. They wanted to sit in the magic bus. They wanted to feel what Chris felt. They were called McCandless Pilgrims, and they were just as unprepared as he was. Every summer, the Alaska State Troopers had to rescue dozens of them. They would try to cross the Teklonica River and get swept away. They would get lost in the taiga. The locals in Healy hated the bus. They saw it as a lure for idiots. They wanted to blow it up. They shot holes in it. Finally, in June 2020, the state of Alaska decided enough was enough. A CH-47 Chinook helicopter, a massive twin-rotor military transport, thundered up the valley. A team of National Guardsmen rigged chains through the windows and axles of Bus 142. As the helicopter lifted off, the bus rose into the air. It dangled beneath the chopper, flying over the trees, over the river that had killed Chris, over the mountains. It was a surreal image, the rusty metal tomb flying through the sky. They flew it to a secure storage facility. The shrine was gone. Why does this story refuse to die? Why do we still talk about a boy who died 30 years ago? Because Chris McCandless asks us the question we are too afraid to answer. We live in boxes. We drive in boxes, to work in boxes, to stare at lighted boxes. We are safe. We are fed. We are comfortable. But are we happy? Chris McCandless looked at the safety of the modern world, and he saw a trap. He saw a spiritual death. He wrote, "So many people live within unhappy circumstances and yet will not take the initiative to change their situation because they are conditioned to a life of security, conformity, and conservatism, all of which may appear to give one peace of mind, but in reality, nothing is more damaging to the adventurous spirit within a man than a secure future." He was wrong about the river. He was wrong about the seeds. He made mistakes that cost him his life. But was he wrong about life? He spent 113 days in the wild. He lived on his own terms. He saw things we will never see. He felt a freedom we will never know. In his final moments, as he lay dying in that bus, he didn't write about regret. He didn't write about fear. He wrote, "I have had a happy life." And maybe, just maybe, he meant it.